Hello and welcome once again. The Bible uses many figures of speech to help us to understand God's meaning for us. We also see descriptive terms used in the Bible. For instance, when we study about elders, we see the term elder, we see the term overseer, we see the term pastor, all used to describe the office and the individual that makes up the elder and what they have to do. So too with the church. We read of the descriptive terms of the church. The church itself is a descriptive term. We see it as the body, the temple. And today we're going to have a look at the term the household of God as a descriptive term of the Bible. In the book of 1 Timothy, in chapter 3, we read in verses 14 and 15, I'm writing these things to you, hoping to come to you before long. But in case I am delayed, I write to you so that you know how one ought to conduct himself in the household of God, which is the church of the living God, the pillar and the support of the truth. You see, the church of the living God is also called the household of God. And this gives us an idea of what it is to be in the church, in the household of God. We are in God's family. Notice what the apostle writes in Ephesians chapter 2 about this. We start in verse 12 where it talks about how that we were at that time separate from Christ, excluded from the commonwealth of Israel. Notice now in verse 19. So then, you are no longer strangers and aliens, but are fellow citizens with the saints and are of God's household. Before we become Christians, before we're added to the Lord's church, we're separate from God. We're separate from the commonwealth. We're separate from the promises. But when we are members of the church of Christ, the church that Jesus built, we are no longer strangers and aliens. We are fellow citizens with the saints, and we are members of God's household. You know, to be a member of the household of God gives us this wonderful, privileged position. We're not out in the outbuildings, we are in the house of God. Jesus gave us this wonderful passage in Matthew chapter 12 and verse 50. Notice, whoever does the will of my Father who is in heaven, he is my brother and my sister and my mother. You see how close we become when we become members of the Lord's church. We are in the household of God. We are adopted as fellow heirs of Christ Jesus. We'd like to now go to the book of John chapter 14, and read starting in verse 1. Do not let your heart be troubled. Believe in God, believe also in me. In my Father's house are many dwelling places. If it were not so, I would have told you. For I go to prepare a place for you. And if I go to prepare a place for you, I will come again and receive you to myself, that where I am, you may be also. You see, Jesus tells us he's going to prepare a place for us. He has prepared a place for us. In his Father's house, there is a dwelling place for us. If we choose to become members of the Lord's church, the church that we read of in the Bible, we become members of the household of God. And there is a dwelling place for us in the house of God, not in the suburbs of heaven, but in the house of God. That is how close we are when we are members of the church of the Bible. Maybe you have some questions dealing with this. Why don't you put them in the comment section below? We'd love to hear from you. And if you'd like to become a member of the Lord's church, let us know and we'll do everything we can to help you. Thank you once again, and goodbye for now.